Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Isbitsky, technical evangelist with Salt Security, and welcome to an episode of MythBusters API Edition. The goal of these videos is to dive into some approaches and technologies that have really fed into some myths in API security that detract from organizations' API security strategies. Now, the format of these videos, we're going to start with kind of establishing some background, just everybody's working from the same knowledge and understanding what these technologies do mean for the business. And then we're going to talk about why these things are not necessarily API security, or maybe only a small component of it. Zero trust is the way. Let's talk about one of my favorite myths, zero trust. What does that mean? So let's dive right into it. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept of zero trust, it is just that. It's kind of a design strategy, or specifically a security strategy, where we want to trust but verify, or trust but continuously verify. It is essentially network security, somewhat in new clothes, but it does map to some technologies, right? So there's kind of this concept of zero trust. We can't specifically trust the computing environment. We can't specifically trust the user or the machine. That's resulted in kind of a new range of technologies. Many of them are security technologies. This includes things like microsegmentation, software-defined perimeters, zero trust network access, or ZTNA. We're even seeing some evolution into new technologies like secure access service edge. What do these technologies aim to do? Well, if you had to sum it up, the goal is they aim to make dynamic network access decisions based on the application context, which is often service communications, unfortunately, the user identity, typically an employee, maybe a consumer. It really depends on the technology you're referring to, and then the behaviors within that session, right? And if I see something that is potentially anomalous, which again is often kind of the service communication or the traffic within that session, maybe I want to challenge for authentication again or drop that user's session. So why are these technologies not necessarily API security? Well, I mentioned that they are essentially just network security in new clothes, right? We're talking about access control. There's kind of this old paradigm in security teachings where we kind of have our computing environment. We treat it like a castle or fortress that needs to be protected. Maybe we build a moat around that, and then we can kind of build these layered defenses that keeps all of the bad stuff out, the bad guys. Well, the reality is that doesn't really work, right? In modern computing, we know there's a lot of newer types of threats, like insider threats, or maybe an attacker finds a way through a trusted system to compromise that and then pivot within the internal trusted networks. So this kind of, defending your castle or perimeter control thinking, it just doesn't hold up in modern computing. This is certainly true with APIs, right? And we've talked about how web APIs are kind of the heart of application and system design. So the unfortunate reality with APIs and why zero trust starts to fall over is that API connectivity really needs to be present in order for APIs to function. And you can't restrict access to web APIs. This is very much how firewalls started to have issues protecting web applications because those web protocols and web ports needed to be open, right? You're typically allowing ADN 443 on HTTP. You didn't want to block that, right? It would break the web application and all of its functionality. The same is very true of web APIs. It's still a similar problem. We also know that API attacks occur in trusted channels and authenticated sessions. It's very common for an attacker to man in the middle an SSL or TLS session. They might do that from an endpoint device, potentially a network component. They might compromise the application code There's many techniques that are available to attackers to compromise trusted encrypted transport. We also know that attackers target authenticated sessions, right? Once I've kind of compromised the network connection and any of those potential endpoint consumers, I could certainly see all of the authentication values, authentication headers, session cookies, you name it, it's visible in the traffic. The other reality, that we're going to touch on in other MythBusters videos is that, a lot of times, because web design is very stateless, developers have to come up with kind of creative ways to maintain session state. So they might kind of cache things on client-side devices or in client-side code, hopefully using protected storage, but attackers will still compromise that as well. And authentication and authorization are very complex, right? There's many attacks where an attacker is taking advantage of a misconfiguration in those access control mechanisms. The other problem with zero trust is that APIs are often consumed by machine identities, right? You run into a lot of cases of direct API communication or machine-to-machine communication. This is very common in a lot of Internet of Things types of deployments or operational technology. There is no possibility to prompt that machine. The communication has to happen, right? Connectivity has to be established. You can't prompt the machine for any kind of authentication material, and you certainly wouldn't want a user or administrator to have to intervene to approve a machine connection. So things like zero trust network access, it's just not going to apply for this type of use case. The other big problem with zero trust is that the metadata that's often necessary to inform these access controls, it's often lacking, right? What tends to happen is as organizations develop, modern applications and APIs, potentially they're getting into microservices architecture, maybe they're looking at containerized technology. There's a lot of units of compute and functions. This may be, high volumes of APIs. Typically, that is what happens. And processes related to tagging and labeling might not be inadequate, right? You also start to get into kind of DevOps maturity and how Git processes are handled and GitOps, right? Am I tagging things appropriately? Is that build pipeline very formalized, not just for my application code, but also for my infrastructure, right? And if that's not present, then these zero trust kind of born access control methods they're just not going to work at scale. And this is a very common problem I've run into. Yet an organization might be invested in these technologies, but they just can't get ahead of kind of the application development and infrastructure engineering to kind of inform the policies that dictate how machines or users can talk to one another. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to another episode of MythBusters API Edition. I'd ask that you keep your eyes peeled for more content from me and my colleagues at Salt Security, as well as some upcoming digital and hopefully physical events in the near future. Definitely check out the Salt Security website. I have many blog articles presently, with many more to come, as well as white papers, case studies, and more. And as always, reach out to us if you have any questions related to API security, but certainly also reach out if you'd like a demo of the Salt Security API protection platform. Again, I'm Mike Isbitsky, Technical Evangelist with Salt Security. Thank you. Have a good day.